Welcome to this edition of the Rayner Report. I had the really fun opportunity many months ago talking to a series of church leaders, pastors I know, and basically I was trying to get to the bottom of this question. What are some of the characteristics of some of the most highly effective pastors? Now, the first thing that I have to admit on this is that when you begin to look at highly effective pastors, there is a lot of subjectivity in that phrase, highly effective. You know, what does that mean? Does that mean they're leading their churches to tremendous evangelistic growth? Does it mean that they have a great discipleship ministry where people are growing day by day in the Lord? Does it mean that there is a great fellowship and there's a lot of unity that takes place? Or does it simply mean that the pastors are largely liked by their congregation and as a result they are willing to follow the leadership of the pastor? Well, the answer is, using the infamous words of Jonathan Howe and Thom Rainer, it depends. But I did come back with some subjective ideas about highly effective pastors. And here's the confirmation in this. As it was done, we were able to talk to other people, and I was able to ask the question, do you think this person is a highly effective pastor? And almost unanimously, if they knew this pastor, they would say, oh, absolutely. And they may not have precise metrics. They may not have precise reasons for this effectiveness as we articulated here. But they all agreed that there were different things. How the pastor was leading in growth. How the pastor related to other people. How the pastor led in discipleship. Really the aggregation of all of those things. These people with whom I spoke said, yes, that person is a highly effective pastor. Okay, we admit that it's subjective. So we pause for just a moment and we say, okay, there is some subjectivity there. Now that we've admitted that and said you kind of get a precise measure of what effectiveness is, now that we've done that, we then go to the next step. We have identified these effective or highly effective pastors. Now that we've identified them, what are some of the characteristics of them? So, we could come up with probably 11 or 12, but if you distill this down even more and maybe combine some that are obvious combinations, when it was all said and done, we came up with 7 characteristics of highly effective pastors. Once again, if you are a numbers nerd, you may have a bit of discomfort with the subjectivity of all of this, but it is a reality that these are the things that we heard repeated again and again about these pastors. Now, I'm going to put these really in the order in which we heard them. That does not necessarily say that means that this is the order of importance, but it's the order in which we heard them. In other words, frequency. So these may not be in terms of what are the most important things, but as people talked about these highly effective pastors, these are the things that were mentioned most frequently in order of the most frequent. Okay, a lot of introductory thing, 3.5 minutes to get to the introduction. Now let's go through each of the 7. Number 1, they have genuine enthusiasm. They have genuine enthusiasm. Not rah cheerleader. Not some type of fake enthusiasm, but they have genuine enthusiasm. The word enthusiasm comes from 2 Greek words, en theos, which means in God. So they were truly excited about their call. They were truly excited about their ministry. They were truly excited about what God was doing in their lives. And it showed. People will follow enthusiasm. If it's genuine, if it is something that reflects a heart for people, they will follow enthusiasm. People do not follow lackluster, boring, dull people, but they follow those who have a genuine heart, a genuine sense of excitement about what God is doing in their lives. We heard this again and again and again. Now, to be clear on this, some of these who are genuinely enthusiastic were extroverts, but some of them were introverts as well. It is not a personality characteristic as much as it is an overflow of how God is working in the lives of these pastors. Number 2, they are great listeners. They are great listeners. We all have a tendency to want to hear ourselves. And as someone else is talking or speaking to us, instead of listening, we're often thinking about how we're going to respond so we can be heard. One thing we heard about these pastors is they are great listeners. A corollary to this is when I spoke to this pastor, I felt like I was the only person in the room. I felt like that pastor was so focused upon me that there was a sense that, wow, there is really concern, caring, empathy that is taking place. Now, just as a kind of a reminder, even though these are characteristics, just be reminded that these are characteristics that are not necessarily, well, let's just put it this way, they can be learned. They can be learned. So, if you're not a great listener, you can focus on listening. How do you do that? As a person is speaking, you're genuinely trying to take in the words he or she is saying instead of thinking about how you're going to respond. I've heard many people, if someone's talking, they're kind of nodding their heads and say, yeah, yeah, yeah. You can almost hear them. I watch their body language because all they're doing is they're prepared to go to what they want to say. They're great listeners. Number 3, their identity is not in their vocation. Now, hear me well. Their identity is in Christ and Christ's call upon their lives, but they don't wake up each morning and say, I am who I am because I am a pastor. They wake up each morning and say, I am who I am because I am a child of God, because I am in Christ. Their identity is not in their vocation. If your identity is in your vocation, you hang on to your vocation. You're never willing to step down or retire from your vocation. You want to have titles in your vocation. You want to be an emeritus. You want to hold on to things because that is your identity. Their identity was not in their vocation. Number 4, they were intentional about personal witnessing. They were intentional about personal witnessing. That does not mean, we could have a debate on whether evangelism is an office or a gift, and I'm not going to go into that, but that does not mean that they have the gift of evangelism or have a natural propensity toward evangelism, but they were intentional about it. The most effective pastors had a pattern where they were intentional and often accountable for evangelism. So 1, they have genuine enthusiasm. 2, they're great listeners. 3, their identity is not in their vocation. 4, they are intentional about personal witnessing. Number 5, they have unconditional love of their critics. Tough one. I know. You pastors know. You leaders know. If you're not being criticized, you probably are not leading. And when criticism happens, there's a visceral reaction to want to fight back and to defend yourself. These pastors had an unconditional love of the critics. In fact, many of them, they told us they prayed for their critics. And this would be related as well. Number 6, they have a gentle spirit. They just have a gentle spirit. It does not mean they're not intense. It does not mean they're not competitive. But there's something about them that's just a gentleness. And you have a genuine comfort around them because they're not all about themselves. They have a spirit that desires the best in others. So number 6 is they have a gentle spirit. Finally, number 7, they persevere. The most effective pastors sometimes just get up the next morning and still do what they're supposed to do. And then the next morning, and the next morning. They persevere. They hang in there. They stick to the task that God has called them until they are certain, beyond any doubt of God's call in their lives, that they're to move to something else. They persevere. Perseverance is not always easy because of the critics, because of the ups and downs of pastoral ministry, because of the great emotional swings that are often present and endemic to the role of being a pastor. They were consistent. They just kept on keeping on, to get it kind of cliche. 7 characteristics of highly effective pastors: genuine enthusiasm, great listeners, identity is not in their vocation, intentional about personal witnessing, unconditional love of their critics, have a gentle spirit, and they persevere. It was really fun to have these discussions about effective pastors. And I hope that for those of you who are pastors or just in roles of leadership, that this could be of some benefit to you. Let me say thank you, as always, to Tim Songster, and just thank him and Costco for their work, for their role at church. And you can look up Costco at churchdesign.com, find out about that design build firm, recommend them all over the place. They're doing a great job. And thank you, those who are viewing this, for being a part of the Rainer Report. Come back in a couple of weeks and we'll have another edition ready for you. I'll see you then.